And a special thanks to our speakers for taking some time out of their busy schedules. They're all very important thinkers and activists in this space. So we're very lucky to have them talking today. So I'll now turn over to Tani Nasional, who's going to host and facilitate the discussion today. Thanks, everyone. And we look forward to a really great conversation.
Thank you, John, for the excellent opening. Hello, everyone. My name is Tani Nasional. I'm a research fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy, and I'll chair our panel discussion today. So we have a lineup of 4 prominent experts on rural issues. Each expert will have a strict 10 minutes to address our main question on the most important policy problems facing rural Indonesia and what can researchers do about them. We will have 4 experts. They are Bapak Nur Fauzi Rahman, Bapak Sirojudin Arif, Ibu Lian Gogali, and Ibu Suraya Afif. I'll introduce each of them before their presentations. And after presentations by the speakers, we will have around 45 minutes discussions for those who wants to stay until 2:30 for discussions. And then John will close our panel discussion with 5 minutes highlights and remarks. And for the audience, please mute your speakers, turn off your cameras, and feel free to use the chat box to ask your questions, which we will then address during the Q&A sessions. So we will start with Bapak Nur Fauzi Rahman, PhD. I'm sure everyone knows him. He is a psychologist and a scholar activist currently serves at Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Padjadjaran, Bandung. He is a political ecologist with expertise on agrarian, environmental, land tenure, forestry, and rural development issues. He also serves as advisor or board member in many civil society organizations such as HUMA, Yayasan Peka, and Samdana Institute. His last book discusses the crisis and predicaments of COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia. So Bang Oji will address our main questions on the most important policy problem facing rural Indonesia on a specific topic related to land reform. The time is yours, Bang Oji, for 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
My presentation will be about how to rework with the policy target of the so-called agrarian reform. My presentation will be in English, but the slide in Bahasa Indonesia. Well, here are my arguments. Yeah, my previous books based on my dissertations to trace back the idea of land reforms, how land reform came back into national policy, and we have to look at the various actors to also investigate the context by which there are mechanisms to promote the land reforms become the national agenda. The productions, trajectory, and the conditions that make its actors possible to work, it cannot be explained in linear fashions. It is important to analyze how, when, and under what conditions their trajectory of the influences, and then how they change over time, move from one place to another in order to achieve their targets, and also working through a particular conjuncture, old and new. So looking at my own experience, it is very important to understand how the struggle from the field into the national policy making processes, it's not something that we can predict, because the constellation within the national policy making processes is very contingent to how you can make your interventions workable. So, of course, we understand, the literature on land reforms and how land reform can be interpreted as a various definitions. And my work can use the understanding initiated by Michael Lipton. It's about redistribution of land ownership to recognize claims and rights over the land and territories, to provide access to the land, natural resources, or the forest territories. And the third is to produce and make and develop the new productive forces at the rural and the rural areas. And all of those three have to be evaluated based on the status, the powers, the absolute income or relative income of the poorest of the poor. So we can see how the poor conditions can change over time. So here what I want to bring you into the Jokowi's era, of 2014, when I started my interventions as a part of the Jokowi's transitions office. And at that transition office, we work to put the land reforms or reforma agraria and then make them become officials at the Rencana Panjang Jangka Menengah Nasional 2015 and 2019. Then at the Presidential Staff Office, I work for 2.5 years in order to make this new land reform policies become mainstreamed into government agencies. Then we have, in their turn, the presidential regulations, presidential instructions, and other ministerial government regulation in order to make it become a program. So in order to make it happen at the national bureaucracy, we have to work through the national institutions. There are some organizations, and one important approach is the targets, numbers. The politics of the numbers is very important for Jokowi's era, and it's, since the beginning until the end of the first period of the Jokowi, these targets still keep become so important in order to push the governments make the programs happen at the field. This also efficacious for the second period of the Jokowi. This is, the targets need to be understood as new mechanisms by which the governments can mobilize their human resources, funding, powers in to achieve the target that regularly evaluated by the presidential office, by the national planning agencies, and also in their turns in the presidents itself. So, of course, because of the time, I cannot go in deep how this target can go at the different levels. There are frames that within the government's cognitions, they divide between the TORA or Tanah Objek Reforma Agraria and the social forestry, perhutanan sosial. And every target have their own mechanisms. The first mechanism that you can see every weeks or every month, presidents delivered the land certificates to peoples. And the second one is about land redistributions through the different mechanisms. And the other one is the social forestry target that the Ministry of Forestry take responsibility for doing it. So the questions for the researcher is how all of these targets, and the achievement of these targets need to be investigated at the field level. Of course, there are many master theses, even dissertations. Take one case, two cases, three cases, and others, and make a comparison one to another. The biggest challenge that I want to propose in these forums is, may us develop a particular research to understand the consequences and unintended effects, and also evaluate, compare to the targets, whether or not, at the scale of the national level. For me, it is important because as we understand, for example, these targets, the land legalizations is something that have effect after 25 years. The World Bank's land administration projects working with the USAID, now DVAT, to put the market frame for the land registration. So what the effect of 25 years market framework for the land registration have effects at the different conditions in Indonesia. This is already 25 years. And as we learned from the previous discussion, in my table, there is a book edited also by John McCarthy. It's about land and development in Indonesia. So there's a paper within this book. It's about land registration after 200 years by Pierre van der Enck. And it's helped me to frame that the introduction of the land markets to land cadastral systems is so influential, after the land cadastral systems have been dedicated for tax and regulations. So the question is, what's the effect, unintended consequences, or risk having such tremendous target that already achieved? We need also to investigate, of course, because of the time, I don't have time to make it in a very detail, what the consequences of land registrations. That this is the important thing, to the land market and the claim for the tenure security, the claim to reduce solve land conflict, as well as the third objective is to reduce poverty. Do those three claims achieve, or there are some other consequences that we cannot understand because of the market frame that already set up in 25 years? We can also put
Bung Oji, sorry, I think the time is up already.
Okay.
Half a minute, please, to wrap up.
My closing statement is all of these targets, looking at a different type of land reform schemes, so-called also social forestry schemes. It needs to be investigated because the scale is unbelievable compared with the historical achievement of the land and access to resources. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rini.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very excellent and very great questions that I think researchers really have to look at. Thanks, Bang Oji, again. And our second presenter will be Bapak Sirojudin Arif, PhD. Pak Sirojudin graduated from Northern Illinois University. Currently, he is the head of the postgraduate study in political science program at Universitas Islam International Indonesia. And he is also a research associate at the Semeru Research Institute. He is the lead author of the Strategic Review of Food Security and Nutrition in Indonesia. Pak Sirojudin research interest focuses broadly on comparative politics, politics of development, and religion and politics. His works have appeared in diverse academic journals, including Journal of Development Perspective and Journal of International Development. So Pak Sirojudin will speak on a specific topic on food security problem in rural Indonesia. The time is yours, Pak Sirojudin.
Thank you for your generous introduction, Bu Rini. And thanks also to Pak John for inviting me to speak in this forum. I really appreciate it. And thanks also for all the participants for attending this session. So for today's talk, Pak John suggested me to talk directly without PowerPoints. I think he knows well that if I use PowerPoint, I might talk much longer than the time allocated. So thanks for reminding me, Pak John. So let me be brief and talk without PowerPoint today. And let me go directly to ask Pak John question about the most important policy problems on food security in rural areas. I will talk briefly about two things here. One is the current situation of food and nutrition security, what needs to be done, and finally, what researchers can do about the problem. So first of all, let me start by saying that Indonesia needs to transform its food and nutrition security system. By saying food and nutrition security, I would like to emphasize the importance of not only availability and access to food, but also the importance of nutritious component of food consumption. As you know, that the definition of food security has changed significantly in the last few decades. So in the 70s and 80s, the emphasis has been on food access, of availability, but since 90s, especially 2000, many policymakers and many scholars have added nutrition in the component. So for example, the Committee on World Food Security stated that food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. And the transformation of food and nutrition system in Indonesia requires many important changes, if not radical ones, in the element of the food and nutrition system, which include food producers, people or consumers, the market, and the government. Certainly, it will be beyond the scope of my talk to deal with all aspects, so let me touch on some key elements. But before we get into the problem of food security and nutrition in rural areas, let me give a little overview about the current situation in Indonesia. And currently, the country is facing what people call as a triple burden of malnutrition, in which undernutrition or hunger coexists with overnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies. So one standard of, to measure food insecurity is the prevalence of stunting, wasting, underweight. And according to the 2018 Riskesdas, around 30.8% of children under 5 in Indonesia were stunted, and around 17.7% are underweighted, and 10.2% are wasted actually. By international standard, this considered is high. So people say that given the country's economic level of development, for example, it's one of the G20 members, this situation is too high for Indonesia. More recently, the government stated that the stunting actually declined to 24.4% in the early this year. But still, according to international standard, this still considered as medium level. And in some provinces, actually, the level of stunting was still high, 30% or higher. Other than undernutrition, even though the undernutrition is declining, the country is witnessing the rise of overnutrition or obesity and overweight. And interestingly, actually, it is among the poor in which the obesity and underweight increase significantly, much faster than among the rich, even though in terms of the absolute number, the rich is still higher. And finally, the country also faces the problem of micronutrient deficiencies. It is a lack of say, vitamin A, vitamin D, iodine, iron, etc. And all this problem will have serious consequences to the economy, to the productivity and health system of the country. So, for example, obesity and overweight are closely associated with the rise of the non-communicable diseases, which will increase significantly the burden of health system. So, according to this problem, will require complex strategies of agricultural, economic, and social development. And for sure, the strategy should address the geographic inequality between rural and urban areas. So one of the biggest contradictions in Indonesia's development is that despite the country's success in providing enough food for the big population, so actually food and nutrition insecurity is higher in rural areas. The poverty has been always high in rural areas. For example, as of March 2022, the PPS note that 12.3% of rural population live under poverty, compared to only 7.5% in urban areas. Among children under 5, the prevalence of stunting and underweight and wasting was also higher in rural areas. For example, 34.9% of children under 5 in rural areas were stunted, compared to 27.3% of children in urban areas. Among the pregnant women, for example, the prevalence of chronic energy deficiency was also higher in rural areas. Rural areas also perform worse in many other indicators. The country also have very low food diversity. According to 2018 Riskesdas, less than 5% of Indonesia's population actually consume enough fruit and vegetables. Again, the proportion of rural population consuming enough food and vegetable is lower than urban areas. And the consumption of rice and maize and staple food is higher in rural areas, while consumption of protein like beef is lower in rural areas. And in fact, consumption of fruit, dietary consumption in rural areas declined in the last, say, couple of decades. Consumption of fruit, vegetable, legumes, tubers, fish declined over this period since in 2000, and this is based on IFRS dataset ranging from 2000 and 2014. So back to main point, improvement in the production of or access to this product should give equal benefit to the rural population. So now what needs to be done? First of all, Indonesia needs to increase the access to diversified food, production of the diversified food, to development of diversified and nutrition-sensitive food system. Over the past several years, the country's attention has been on the production of staple food at the expense of other products. Budget allocation for staple, for example, for maize and rice, have been much higher, increased significantly, making the budget allocation for horticulture and food diversification is low, actually. So the country should move from its current tension from rice-focused policies toward more to achieve a more balanced, diversified diet. At the same time, efforts are also needed to mitigate the impact of climate change on food production. Some evidence shows that there has been some seasonal shift in the beginning of planting and harvesting. This change adversely affected the size of the areas planted and harvested. So unless significant changes are made in the way the country deals with the climate change, some predict that actually the production of most food crop will decline in the next few decades. So this will require improvement in research and technology for sure. Secondly, behavioral changes are needed to enhance food and nutrition security for the population. So according to the country's Pola Pangan Harapan, or desirable dietary food, Indonesia has quite high score, 92.5% out of 100. But by international standard, actually food diversity is very low in the country. According to the 2019 Global Food Security Index, Indonesia was ranked 102 out of 113 countries surveyed in the index. So the change in the dietary patterns requires improvement in both supply and demands of diversified nutrition-sensitive food. And as the first step, we believe that promoting a balanced diet, to promote this balanced diet, government should improve people's awareness of the importance of balanced diet for health and to facilitate behavioral changes in food consumption. And to attain this, certainly the government should improve the production of nutrition-sensitive food, should improve policies and program in raising food production and improving food access to food, enhancing food utilization. But it is also important to remember that transformation should deal not only with food production or food consumption, but also with nutrition. And for this purpose, enhancement of health provision as well as clean water and sanitation are required. Our estimation suggests that access to clean water and sanitation does matter for reduction of the stunting. However, access to these facilities, access to clean water and to sanitation was unequal between rural and urban areas. For example, access to clean water in rural areas is this is quite high, for example, actually, 78.6% from the lowest 40%. But for urban areas, actually, it's much higher, 63.3%. And access to sanitation in rural areas was also much lower than urban areas. In rural areas, it's 64.2%, while in urban areas, it's 81.6%. So access for health services for pregnant mothers was also lower in rural areas in terms of the specialist doctors, for example. So to achieve these strategic goals, the enhancement of health provision and social protection system will be necessary, but it won't be sufficient. So it is necessary for the country to address some weaknesses in the current social protection system, for example. For example, to address some weaknesses in the database, how to update the recipient of the program, for example, and to improve the quality of the food assistance program. But it is also important to enhance the agency power of food producers, especially small powers. It is cliche to say that being a farmer is associated with poverty, but the truth is that actually the incomes of the rice producers, the food producers, are among the lowest. It's much lower compared to other types of to farmers. And the government's policy orientation to conceive food security at the national level actually will not address the concerns and interests of the small producers. So many people say that food production policies should be oriented to developing locally based food systems in which small producers have important roles. So finally,
okay. So half minute to wrap up, please.
Okay. Finally, let me get to my last point. So some elements of these ideas has been on the air. Many have articulated these ideas, but how to get them implemented still elusive. How, for example, how to implement massive changes in behavioral changes toward the dietary food, for example. And then secondly, the outcomes of food nutrition is not only economical or technical, but it's also political. It involves long processes of political decision making. And in this process, the voice of the farmers and the representative is still small. So it is important for the researchers to scrutinize how is it possible to enhance the voice of the farmers as well as the representative in the decision-making process among the food and nutrition security. And finally, it's also important to address the power asymmetries that the distribution of food and nutrition from the production to the table. It involves long processes, including the market system, including the traders. So how is it possible for the country to make sure that the distribution of the gain from these processes are actually equitable to the point that actually food producers could enhance their situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Sirojudin. That's a very challenging questions that have to be then answered by researchers to really look at the food policy in our rural areas in Indonesia. Thanks again, Pak Sirojudin. And our third speaker is Ibu Suraya Afif, PhD. I'm sure everyone here knows Ibu Suraya. She is an associate professor at the anthropology department, University of Indonesia. She is a political ecologist, and her study examines agrarian environmental changes in rural Indonesia. Her most recent studies have been on the effects of labor migration, remittance, and commodity enclosures on industrial agriculture and forest landscape. Ibu Suraya has noted that this research was done in collaboration with Nancy Peluso, Kimberly Carlson, and Lisa Kelly. Ibu Suraya will address a specific topic on rural migration. The time is yours, Ibu Suraya. Thank you.
Thank you, Rini, for the introductions. And I realized that one of the audience is actually Professor Nancy Peluso. So she could also, when during this discussion, could bring also some issue that I might not address in my talk. So good morning or afternoon or evening for everyone here. So again, thank you for Rini and John McCarthy to organize this event and to invite me to talk about the focus that I would like to bring in this discussion is the rural migration. So I think this is one of the issues that still does not get much attention in the agrarian study. So in the past 2-3 years, I'm part of the research initiative that try to understand migration from the agrarian lens. As Rini already explained, that it's a joint project with Professor Nancy Peluso from UC Berkeley, Kimberly Carlson from New York University, Sakeli, from University of Colorado at Denver, and we have also about 12 research assistants that help us to collect data in 4 sites in Indonesia. So the study is not interested in the issue of migration per se, but migration in the particularly the labor migration in the context of agrarian change. And the second aspect of this study is also trying to look labor migration in the connection with the large-scale agriculture and forest plantation. So we purposely select the sites, village that has large-scale agricultural forest plantations. So in other words, we would like to understand not only how labor migration influenced by the agrarian change, but also how labor migration shaped by the government policy or, remnant of the colonial policy to facilitate expansion of huge land for agriculture and forest corporate plantation. So this migration and plantation nexus is also still a topic that under study in agrarian studies here. Since I have only 10 minutes to speak, so I'm trying to just address at least 3 points for this further discussion. So one of the insight we got from our study is that how we tend to forget that migration has been always important as one of the drivers in agrarian change in rural area, of course. Historically, people migrate from place to place for various reasons. In the context of plantation, people migrate to find a job. It's not necessary by force or some kind of institution that organize recruitment for labor, but also people will also come voluntarily, migrate to find job for wage. we see also in North Sumatra and also in a place in Java and also in Kalimantan and in Sulawesi. In my research sites in North Sumatra, for example, it's not just migration of people from Java to work in this plantation, it's a colonial plantations, but also I found local migration where upland people move to lowland area, not in some case looking for land that they can cultivate for farming, but also for wage. Therefore, in most rural places, migration is not a recent phenomenon. But again, this is under studies. Of course, in Indonesian context, we cannot ignore the impact of transmigration that has been significant in the transformation of the rural landscape in Indonesia. But it's also important to understand the agrarian change shaped by different types of voluntary migration. So it's not just transmigrations. And the second point that I would like to say related to rural migration is the issue of remittances that rural folks brought back to their village from the money they able to save from working as migrant labor, domestically or internationally. I think there are already so many studies that show the growing importance of non-farm income in rural livelihood. Remittances that people might able to send back to their families in the village is one of these sources of this non-farm income for rural households. Remittances are not only used for daily consumption and to help sibling to go to school or build or renovate their houses, but in some cases, and this is what we also interested, is also how this remittance is a source of capital that people invest in various economic activity to support their family income in the rural area. So in the site where I work in North Sumatra, people are desire to use the remittance to buy land. It's not just only for housing, but also for investment in their own, well, in the North Sumatra is actually for oil palm and other commodities. However, since huge area of land nearby their village or settlement that's already under corporate plantation, there were limited land available for them to purchase. So here we see scarcity of land is not because of demographic reason, which sometimes assume that very little land to many people, but obviously in many rural Indonesia, the land scarcity is caused by government policy that has been given a large tract of land for corporation. So land scarcity by design, we can say, it is one of the issue that social movement, like my colleague Nur Fauzi has talked about the recent government agrarian policy to address this lack or few security access for rural households. However, I also noticed very few studies that investigate the connection between this land policy, that land reform policy initiative, and remittances that people get from labor migration. So how this capital that people brought, and where in the area where land reform initiative has taken place is also one of the issues that we need to further studies. Access to and control of the land, we also know, still important for rural poor families. In my opinion, we cannot address poverty reduction in the rural areas without also addressing the problem of access to land for the poor families. No one would able to get out from poverty if household source income only depend on wage from working as plantation labor. Now, I've talked to many people from the top manager down to the lower ranking paid labor in the plantations. They all say that they would like to have a better off if they also have a piece of land for their own plantations. So people work in this plantation would try to buy a piece of land as long as for security of livelihood especially after they no longer work in the plantation. So in many rural households, family depends on the number of lands. So the more wealthy family, the more land that they can acquire. So the access to land, ownership of land, it's important in addressing rural poverty in the rural Indonesia. For the full family who don't have land or other means to get cash earning, oftentimes working in the overseas as a labor is the only option for them to save money that they can use for investment in their hometown village. I'm not blind to the fact that human rights problem that many migrants labor often experience, in particularly who work in the international migrant labor. But I'm not saying also there is no risk to involve if you work overseas. However, for poor family, often they have limited choice, either to go hungry or cannot support their child education as a strategy to get out from poverty. If they choose to stay or if they choose to stay or take opportunity to work overseas, even if there are risks involved. Now, the money these people bring, so the more people in neighborhoods succeeds in taking this route, going overseas, the more people want to go to the cities and overseas to find work. Some of them were able to save and brought the money back to their family in the village as remittance and invest in many local economic activities. Now, in the context of recent land reform policy in Indonesia, that's OJ, actually shares social forestry or tanah objek reformasi. If people were able to get piece of land that they can farm as a result of this government policy, the question remains how they could get capital to invest in these lands. It's interesting to find out whether remittance from the migrant labor play important roles in providing seed money for villagers to invest in the rural area where land reform policy has been implemented. So the last point that I want to address is also important to integrate gender relation among other issues in the agrarian studies. In many agrarian studies, at least in Indonesia, very few study has focused on the option for women to earn money for wage as source of income for families. Women also mostly responsible for social production, which labor that they give, it's not a money earning income. So how the production for income and social production relation with women this is also important to be studied. In the site where I conduct this study, where plantation corporation hire more men than women as a full-time worker, as a karyawan. Women only has option to be hired as buruh harian lepas, as BHL we call buruh harian lepas, which is daily labor. Women get low wage and did not receive any benefit that men receive as a full-time plantation employee. In the rural areas, in fact, very limited option for women to earn a decent income compared to men. And moreover, as an education for children get better in some days of village, young generation in the rural area are less desired to work in the agriculture sector. International migration often provide women to earn money, and in some cases they could save this money, and in some cases these women also invest in economic activity in their village. In our research study in Java, for example, that where Nancy Peluso conducted her study, in fact, remittance from these women are quite significant in transforming the rural economy and landscape. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to have further discussions.
Thank you, Mbak Suraya, for the important questions for all the researchers that have to be addressed, including relating or interconnecting remittances with land reform agenda. That was a really excellent overview from Mbak Suraya. And our last speaker, but of course not least, is Ibu Lian Gogali. Ibu Lian is the founder and chairwoman of the Mosintowo Institute, a grassroots community organization based in Poso, Central Sulawesi. Ibu Lian has been active in organizing women's groups in rural areas. As a result, more than 200 women grassroots leaders are actively involved in village decision-making, including becoming village heads themselves. Ibu Lian has received so many awards and accolades in recognition of her contribution to women empowerment, interfaith and peace-building initiatives, and rural development. In April 2022, Ibu Lian received 4 Freedom Award from the Roosevelt Foundation in the Netherlands. Ibu Lian will address a specific topic on women and village governance. The time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mbak Rini, for your generous introduction, and also for Australian National University to invite me talking about women and development. Since I live and come from Poso, Central Sulawesi, Indonesia, so my disclaimer is that my presentation will focus on the context of Central Sulawesi, of course, the Central Sulawesi development. I will start with the Jokowi statement. In his inauguration, President Jokowi emphasized the concept of development, which will be the orientation in his regime in 2019 until 2024. It says like this one: we are no longer focused on the process. The most important thing is the result. The statement is then followed by development policy plans in Indonesia that ignore the environmental issue. Seeing the cultural wisdom of the community is not very important in the development process. In fact, this course was launched in Eliminate AMDAL, or Environment Impact Analysis, as an important obligation or requirement for companies to invest or manage natural resources. The development policy and a perspective will ultimately have a direct impact on every corner in the village, spreading into sub-village in every region in Indonesia, including in my area in Poso District, Central Sulawesi. The destruction of the environment in the name of investment in this case. In 2014, the village law gave more space actually for the village to design and manage their own villages. With the current perspective of development, the independence of the village to manage its natural resources, including local wisdom, is not only threatened, but also legitimized to be destroyed because of a development perspective that justify any means to bring in and benefit investment for economic gain. In Central Sulawesi region is one of the focus or locus of exploitation of natural resources in Eastern Indonesia. Gold mines, nickel mines, oil and gas, gold mines, palm oil plantations are all in Central Sulawesi, including in hydroelectric power plants. Villages in Central Sulawesi are threatened by the environment and culture. In fact, Central Sulawesi is one of the active fault region in that could cause earthquake, tsunami, including liquefactions. Also, the forests in the Central Sulawesi region are designed as a protected forest. All of this potential just ignored for the investment. Post-conflict development in Poso district is oriented because I live in the Poso district. So now the post-conflict development in Poso district is oriented towards physical development so that it neglects social and cultural development in the community. Such development has resulted in the emergency of potential social conflict and the loss of social ties and solidarity with the village community who have just recovered from the violent conflict. In Poso district itself involves large-scale investments such as palm oil plantation, building dams for hydropower, and gold mining. This investment has the potential to create conflict over natural resources as community also lose land and source of livelihoods, damage to culture sites, and environment damage that has long-term impacts on the community. I can say that in addition to the national development context that affect developments in villages, Poso Regency, and several other regions in Indonesia, we have another context which is post-violent conflicts. Therefore, in development in post-conflict areas, security policies influence the concept of development. This is the first point that I would like to address. Language and iterative development programs convey ideas related to peace building. Sentences that carry this with them a history of violent conflict. Main language, which is investment in providing jobs, are keywords that are always echoed by the government and authorities in development policies in Poso. Because the focus is on the result, the community social recovery process is not a concern. On the other hand, the history of violent conflict is used as a material to legitimize the entry of a development model with large investment in village to create jobs. In all the ongoing politics and economic contestation in Indonesia, we all agree that women are the most marginalized party. In the context of development, especially agriculture, actually women in Sulawesi in particular do not see the concept of agriculture as an object of development, but as a culture system. Land is not seen as a category of productive or unproductive. Land is seen more as conceptual, like a living space, not just a job field. Cultural system becomes important in women experience. The cultural system is built on the relationship between human and nature. Viewing the concept of agriculture as a cultural system places development not only centered on humans, but involves social systems and mechanisms. So if the questions is what is the most important policy problem facing rural Indonesia and what can we do about them, I think there one thing that we are now still working on is dismantling discourse in the language offered by development, including agriculture. There is so many languages offered by the development, like the category of poverty, and including the indicator of poverty, which needs to check again, including to dismantling the discourse, so then we can find what exactly the village give meaning on that one. And the second one is the categories of development offered by the government. And then other things is finding local wisdom in agriculture management that places nature as an equal part of the human. And in this case, is discovering village strength. So not only focusing on the national development policy on development or in agriculture, but also discovering the village strength and what's village strength to develop their own natural resources, including without losing their culture system. And funding failures that have omitted culture institutions that have been silenced in development because this will causing the village to trap in impoverished development. For now, I can tell that we are currently in collaborating with 23 villages to develop a village reform school. Why we think that the village reform school is really important to be done, because there is an assumption that we found together with the women in the village that the village is not currently sick of corrupt development mechanism and system that impoverish society, sick because of development policy that place the community as an object of development. At the village reform school, we now starting in Poso district, we trying to dissemble the development discourse and agriculture concept offered by the government so far. So the women self-assembled what they mean by the prosperity, finding the indicator of prosperity that they consider important. The discover of indicators of village prosperity by women is accompanied by cooperation to realize the village prosperity. As a conclusion, I would like to say that it's really important to take a look again about how the women in the village has connections between the culture and the natural resources as a one mechanism, not as an object of development. And in that sense, also to find about how the village determine their own prosperity, determine about their own concept to the development. So the development is not from top down, but it will be like have their own like unique way to do so. So I hope it's will be start the conversation after this. After this, I will back to Mbak Rini. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Lian. That was a really good reminder for all scholar activists about the importance of a bottom-up approach in looking at development in rural areas in Indonesia. So we already have so many questions in the chat box. So I'll try to distribute the questions evenly to all the speakers. We'll start with the first question from Mas Colum Graham. Mas Colum, do you want to ask question directly to Bang Oji? And please try to summarize your question, please. Thanks. Okay, so yeah, so Mas Colum has a really long question for Bang Oji, but I guess the summary of it is that what kind of advice do you have for people who address research on land reform in Indonesia and navigate the epistemological contradiction between the need to do critical qualitative research and looking at how the state is very focusing on and occupied by numbers. What do you think, Bang Oji?
Okay. May I answer right now directly?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I will suggest you to take a distance little bit instead of looking at what the target that achieved by the policy of number. But I suggest you to look at how the policy of number can play in the way in which land reform may be adopted as a national policy strategy. What the condition that make that policy of number workable yeah, at the multiple levels under the direction of the president. That is very special for Jokowi. Remember, Jokowi has a particular concern with the condition of the poorest people in the rural area because of their lack of the access to the land and including forest and other resources. So in order to make the agendas that promoted by communities, social movement activists, the academicians, when you come into the kitchens of the policy processes, you have to make it feasible. Jokowi is very famous for a simplicity. Yeah, when you have a long policy paper delivered to the presidential office, so it cannot be digested. You have to present in a very short ways, full by something that make him attractive to the point that you may present. So politics of number is important. Yeah, I had a vivid experience. I remember Jokowi asked me, Mas Oji, do you think this number can be achieved? How you come into that number? For me, that question is very important when I was challenged in the process of making the land reform agendas through various schemes. Yeah, of course, when that politics of number come into the president have another reference for doing that. It is important to understand how, for example, the numbers of the target for land registration come into the framework. Wow, that's okay. We know in academics, land registration or land titling before registration, that's a different concept of the land reform. Yeah, but within the so-called Reforma Agraria, as a new land policy of Jokowi, it's come into under the same framework. So looking at that process critically, so the question is what's the limit and what's the efficacy measurements in order to make your agendas come into the national policy processes, yeah, exemplified by the Jokowi's term, the first term and the second term. My last advice is, if you have an access to the empirical data, make it become visible what the consequences, yeah, of that achievement at a different geography of Indonesia. Yeah, we know different islands have a different historical geography, ethnicity, the condition of the poor peoples and those who access to the land. In the context of other paradigms, yeah, we know about the economic growth and the way in which economic geography can produce the land dispossessions, like what happened at Merauke, for example. That's very, very important to investigate what the consequences of those land reform in the context of land dispossession and concentration. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bang Oji. And the next question is for Pak Sirojudin from Fania, which also, I think, relate to questions from Mas Rizky. So, Pak Sirojudin, the government agenda is quite heavily pushed on the addressing the stunting issue. How do you think this focus on stunting can also address other issues of food security? And what are the role of the local governments? And then it's also linked to Mas Rizky's questions about the difference of people in rural area that experience stunting and people in urban area that usually experience obesity, and the connection between this with the gaps of income between rural and urban communities. Please, Pak Sirojudin.
So thank you for this question. Let me try to answer. Maybe not all of them, but it seems they are complicated. But let me try this question. So let me start by answering the yes. It is right that the government since the last 5 years has several programs, and the goal is very good, addressing the stunting. And as you know, that the stunting in Indonesia declined quite significantly if we compare between the say in the last 7 to 5 years and the previous era. So somehow it is attributed to the aggressive agendas by the recent administration to address the stunting. And the way the government deal with the stunting is they launch what we call as different types of program that hopefully they can work together to tackle stunting. They have what we call as nutrition-specific program and nutrition-sensitive program. Nutrition-specific program, or both of these programs somehow are directly related to health aspect of food security. Something like providing access to clean water, good sanitation, health provision in the rural areas, and some how to address illness that might affect how people absorb the food. So this program will be good, and we know that yes, they have a effective in addressing the stunting. But food security deal not only with the health aspect again, it also deal with the food access, with food production, etc. So while this recent program are really good at addressing the health aspect of nutrition, how to address the food production, the food distribution is another matter. That will require concerted effort by certainly other actors, and somehow this today we I think something that we miss is how economists will talk about this issue. For example, that's something that that need to be addressed to. And the next question is how is it possible for the local government deal with this problem? So this program is centralized by the central government, and somehow under decentralization, the relationship between the central and the district government has changed significantly. So the central government might instruct something to the local government, but the local government has autonomy to say something. That's what we learned from when doing interview with people from central government. So one of the problem is, for example, now the central government in order to boost the production of say diversified food system, that each province should try to produce one specific product for their province in order to diversify food consumption. But every local government, they had developed what they call as tata ruang, right? So they already developed specific plan for their region zoning system, and something that okay, this region is for business, this region is for commercial, and despite the effort to limit the the land conversion from agriculture to commercial or business or residential, so actually in the country cannot deal with this problem. And in order to diversify food, for example, one of the issues is how to allocate enough land, for example. And this contradiction between the local government and the central government, something that needs to further address as one of the problem in how to address the food security. And okay, and now regarding the the obesity and something related to that, the country is facing the dietary transition, which is quite fast and rapid, and it happened at massive level. So the consumption of the what we call as in statistics, this is food that consumed outside, that is bought outside rather than cooked within the house, actually increased very significantly during the last few years. And the COVID might have significant impact on that point. And the change in the economy, and the change in the structure of the production might also contribute to the way that people now now rather than cooking themselves, now it is easy for us. It's better for us to say easy to buy our food. And with this tradition now, instant food, the production of instant food increased significantly, not only in the actually in urban areas, but also in rural areas. So in order to address this problem, it deals not only with the supply of the food, diversified food, but it also has to do with how the awareness of the population, how people aware that, okay, I need to get the good food, as well as in terms of the supply. It's not only about the production, but how to distribute. People might it easier to get snack, to get processed food rather than healthy food in many areas. That's one of the policies that the government need to address as well. So so again, this might involve many actors and many policies that in order to address the food security. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Sirojudin. I think that's also then answered Pak Hendra's question about 4 Sehat 5 Sempurna and the problem of junk food that the society face in Indonesia. So next question will be for Ibu Suraya. Mbak Suraya, there are so many questions about remittance. So from Jeff, he wants to know whether this remittance are to buy land, and whether the farmers or households are usually intending to farm this land, or they just use this land as speculative investment. And that then connect to Column's questions about remittance in the form of cattle, that it's sometimes very difficult to use cattle as collateral because maybe sometimes they died or something. And then that also then connect about questions about whether actually farmers who migrate to the urban area and become low-paid workers have enough money to send as remittance to their families in the rural area. Please, Mbak Suraya.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, I think probably I will not pinpoint one of them. First, that I think in every place, is not just Indonesia, what it's called enclosures, land enclosure, right? So they push, its plantation is just one, transmigration the second, and in many places that, in some cases that you said that they use for industrial zone, yeah? But that's in several, in very particular places. All of them are the process of enclosure, which is you grab the land and you push the people. And the people that push out from the land actually move, either because a lot of them cannot, in fact, get job from the industry that take over the land. So they have to find, places for wage labor. Absolutely, I agree with you that a lot of this wage, it's actually, if it's national and domestic, it's very low. It's very not satisfying or to support families. So you have these people are pushing from their land, and they cannot get a decent job unless they could social mobility. One of the social mobility through education. And people who get under wage, very low paid, actually could not send their children to school, for education, because one of the social mobility is through education. Recently, I appear in Compass, where that the ability to pay children to go to school are diminishing, declining, because so no one have ever related to the how this family, if it's a rural family, paid for education. It's I just come from Sintang, and I was surprised when I asked how you pay for your children education, and many of them said rubber, not oil palm, because Sintang is just in this place is just beginning. So that is one of the issue. People invest in plantation, either rubber or oil palm or other commodities, are oftentimes to pay for their children education. In my place, I'm not rule out buying land for investment. What they call for speculations. But in my place, very few that people buy land for speculation. If they buy land, they wanna have house that they build their own land, and they buy a piece of land for commodities. And still, I didn't at least in my place where I do research. I did my research. I didn't see the speculation. Probably if that land is close to the city, then maybe there is a speculation going on. So we cannot assume people buy land for just for speculation. I think in many cases, people really buy land for investment, at least in the place that or for housing. The other is, I forgot, I lost is that other questions?
Remittance
about the livestock, right?
Yeah.
Related to the livestock. Yeah.
And the problem of low-paid migrant workers in the urban areas in factories.
Right. So because of the low-paid wage in the urban area, in the if they just go to the city working in the factory, so opportunity for international labor are people are inclined to have that opportunity because of the wage. Of course, not in many countries that people allowed to save. Yeah, if you go to Malaysia, some people able to save, some people could not able to save. It depends on the work job. So in my village that I work, many young girls go to Malaysia to work in the factory, and I've seen some people able to save the money, either bring back to buy land for house and buy piece of land, even small, for their own commodity, and so the family manage that remittances. In my village, I don't people not going to Malaysia for working in the as pembantu, pembantu rumah tangga or other, but it's to go to the factory. So that factory in Malaysia actually controlled by the government, that allow the company has to pay a certain amount that some people able to save that money and then bring back as investment. So that is the reason why international labor are much more attractive for these women and men, but of course, not all places and all area that facilities possible. Yeah. Now, when when I think there is a issue of buying a cow. Well, in my area, actually, livestock is the other one important investment. However, there is a lot of constraint by buying cows, because in order to able to buying a cow and taking care, you need a place to basically tambat, yeah. Because a cow in North Sumatra, in my place, it's not have in a kandang, yeah, it's not in the cage. They roaming in the plantation area. But Professor Nancy's Caruso sites, they buy cow for milk, and they need they need feeders, and that's how they need access to land to plant